I'd like to apologize to my fellow board members and to the audience for being late today. I have no excuse. Secretary, please call the roll so we can establish a quorum.
Very good. Senator Lowenthal, Senator Hancock, Senator Weiland, Assemblymember Fuller, Assemblymember Brownlee, Assemblymember Torlakson, Scott Harvey, Kathleen Moore, Rosario Gerard, Tom Sheehy.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Great. Rob, what is our first item today? Is it minutes?
First item is minutes, and for the April 22nd minutes, I'd like to note one correction. Ms. Brownlee is noted as present, but was only able to very briefly come into the room. I believe you wanted to have that noted for the record. Okay. So with that one change, the minutes are ready for your approval.
Do we have any questions or comments from board members?
Move approval.
We have a motion to approve.
Second.
We have a second. All in favor? Aye. 20-second recess. Weiland will not be with us today, and he has asked, Senator Weiland did say he wanted to weigh in on the Glendale matter, and he did ask that item be put over. If there isn't strong objection to that, delighted to do it. I know the board. I think the board members here are ready to vote on that item, and I think we might have 6 votes when Senator Lowenthal shows up. So. It's up to you. Your colleague asked that it be.
Mr. Sheehy?
Yes.
Could I just ask, did Senator Weiland vote for?
Yes, he's supporting this item.
Okay. I believe I had questions about that at our last meeting, and since then I've reviewed the timeline and looked into it, and I am prepared to vote for it now. So
I believe Senator Lowenthal is too, so be happy to take that item up. I do want to know for the record, Senator Weiland did want to ask that it be put over, so I'll leave it up to the board when our other colleague is here. And then Senator Lowenthal will be here in a little bit. He, as you all know, the Budget Conference Committee is convening, and he had the great fortune, or maybe some might think the misfortune, of being on that Budget Conference Committee. They're having to make some very difficult decisions here on the state budget. But he will be here, and he asked that several items be put over that he would like to be here on. So we're going to try to accommodate Senator Lowenthal as much as we possibly can. And if we run out of things to do, we'll take up some of those items and we'll just leave them on call so that he can still weigh in. In fact, anything that we vote on, we'll leave on call so Senator Lowenthal can add on. So let's leave the roll call on the minutes open as well. Okay, can we do that? Okay, great. How about the executive officer's report?
I have some great news to.
I apologize, Rob. My colleagues informed me that there's 2 sets of minutes that need to be approved today.
Oh, there are 2 sets of minutes. I thought the action the board just took approved both. Is that not accurate?
Is there any objection from the board members to include? Was it March?
That's correct.
To include the March minutes along with April.
On the April 22nd meeting, I would abstain since I was not present.
Okay, we have an abstention. Do we have any other comments from board members on that? Okay, so, yes, Senator Torlakson. Okay, great. So hearing no objection on the revised motion to approve the minutes, all in favor? Aye. Okay. And we're going to leave the roll open for Senator Lowenthal. Senator Torlakson.
an honor. Thank you. It's with pride that I call myself a public servant, and my loyalty and service to this board and California school districts. Okay. Thanks, Lisa. You're welcome. To this board and to California's children and to the school districts and their representatives and to all the people at OPSE all throughout my years, it's meant a great deal to me. And I couldn't have asked for to work with such a dedicated and talented group of people. And I thank them for all that I've learned from them, and as well as my mentors through the years. I've learned from everyone that has crossed my path. And this is challenging and never-ending work, a labor of love that I always did for the sake of my family. And without their love and support, I couldn't have had the successes that I have had through the years. I'd like to take a moment to introduce my husband, my incredibly handsome and talented Marcus Morgan. And my wonderful son, he couldn't be here with us today. He's hard at work. And his bride-to-be in October, Megan and Nick. So I send my love to them at home. I will treasure my years in service to this board forever. And I just want to thank everybody very much.
Thank you, Lori.
Thank you very much, Senator Torlakson. And
Thank you.
Lori, thank you for all of your years of service. You know, when I had the tough job of filling Ann Sheehan's shoes, the first thing she told me, she said, look, if you ever really get stuck on something, even if it's late at night, she says, call Lori Morgan. She said, she'll know the answer and she'll be able to bail you out. And so, you know, we all think very highly of you, and we're just so proud of all the service that you provided to OPSC in the state of California, Lori. Thank you so much.
And we still have that phone number.
That's okay.
Absolutely. Okay, now I have another guest here today who's not on the agenda, but that I'd like to introduce to you. The governor appointed Laura Schick to be our Inspector General for the Federal Recovery Funds. The Federal Recovery Funds is the American Reinvestment Act signed into law by President Barack Obama in February. And Laura's going to help make sure that the funds are accounted for and spent properly. And of course, one of her interests here, I think, will be our bond program, because we are, in fact, using the Build America bonds. Ms. Schick, would you like to come forward and say hello to the board?
Certainly.
Push the button.
Button. Now it's working. And I know most people hesitate on my name. It's actually Chick.
I apologize.
No, it's okay. I think I understand why you hesitate.
Better you said that than me.
Well, and my title used to be Controller Chick, and some people got it mixed up with Controlling Chick. So now I'm Inspector General Chick. But anyway, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. And I'm on a steep learning curve from the city of LA, but eager to take in as much information as possible. And thank you for your good work. And I'm just pleased to be here and looking forward to working more with you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Chick.
Thank you.
Yes, Assemblywoman Brownlee.
Yes, I just wanted to extend my warm welcome to Laura. I've had the opportunity, I think I might be the only Southern Californian representative here, along with Ms. Gerard, but we've had the opportunity to see Laura's work firsthand for the city of Los Angeles. And the governor has made an absolutely fabulous decision in appointing her in this position. And I know she will be a good rudder for us all and will make sure that the state moves in the right direction and that we spend our money wisely and effectively, fairly and efficiently. And I'm just delighted that she's here and has an extra set of eyes on the work that we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Brownlee. Other comments from members? Seeing none, Okay, Rob, why don't we move to your executive officer statement?
Okay. Thank you. I have, fortunately, some very good news to share with folks today, and it's related to the March and April bond sales. And I want to note at the outset that we were asked to set a standing item for funding on our agenda, handling it through the executive officer statement at this round because our success has been so high. But we will have that on our as a standing item if there are issues that we need to deal with on future agendas. But in the March round, March round of bond sales, this program received $548 million, all out of Proposition 1D. In the April sale of Build America bonds, this program received approximately just under $1.44 billion. Combined, we're at about $1.98, $1.99 billion, which is the most that any infrastructure program in the state of California has received through the bond sales, including $700 million more than the next infrastructure program. And given that the state is not the contractor and not the liable party to many of to the infrastructure projects that we fund, that commitment should be lost on no one. That's a sizable commitment by the state of California for this. That still leaves us short of funds to cover all of the projects that have been apportioned. There were $2.4 billion in projects that were apportioned. We're a little over $400 million short of being able to cover all of those, but we will be able to release funds to every project that has a valid fund release before us today. And if you'd asked me whether we'd be in that position back in February, I would not have believed our current state of affairs. So I think that's excellent news. I'll also give you an update on the release of funds under the March bond sale. There's $548 million. Most of that money is out on the street today. We're literally down to one district that is looking for some contract documents. Everybody else is either money is in their hands or it's on the way to them. So we're highly successful in moving that money out on the street, and we look forward. We've done recent certifications for the April bond sale. We will be moving those funds out to districts very quickly. At our last board meeting, Senator Hancock asked us to distribute a letter to school districts to encourage them to take advantage of our high performance incentive grant program. Behind the executive officer's statement, you will find that letter that was issued on May 19th. It provides district some basic information about the program as well as the regulations, links to the Collaborative for High Performing Schools, links to LEAD for Schools, and to the Division of State Architects Grid Neutral Guidebook, which we had some hand in developing. As basic information for school districts. You'll also note a letter that was sent on May 11th from the state architect and I to school districts, encourage them to take advantage of the grid neutral guidebook and grid neutral program that has been developed. And that's there for your information. We also recently went through some efforts to streamline our internal operations. And one of the things that we assessed in developing the board books that are before you, we run through about 30 cases of paper every month, which means that there are a couple of forests we have our name on out there. We have looked at how we streamline our operations, and of course we'll deliver hard copy to board members, but we're going to be encouraging school districts and others who are of interest. We're going to be posting our board books online. In fact, posted today, the first edition. But to encourage folks to go and draw down go online and get the items they wish without having to go through the expense of in this case, a 508-page document that many districts care about 1 or 2 or 3 items in. The current process is to copy all of that and give them to it, give it to them even if they only want 2 or 3 pages. So we look forward to that, encouraging districts to take advantage of that option and obtain their information electronically rather than in hard copy. With With that, that concludes my remarks.
I have one more thing I'd like to add, and then I'm going to have Ms. Moore. Also, Rob, I believe at the last meeting there was a request to have as a standing item through the end of this year a status of funds in light of our bond situation and fund releases. I know you covered that in your executive officer statement today, and I'm sure the board members appreciate that, but I think it would be helpful for others and for us to have that as a standing item at least through the end of this year. Hopefully by the end of this year we'll be in a little firmer standing. Ms. Brown. Ms. Moore, I'm sorry, why do I do that, Kathleen? I apologize. Kathleen, I'm very sorry.
Anytime. I just want to, so Rob, the entire the entire agenda is available online, all 500 pages, so anybody could access any portion of it?
Yes, it's all online. It's on our website right now.
That's great. Thank you.
Ms. Brownlee.
I just want to thank you for taking that step in terms of getting the agenda online. And I also, in terms of a status report that the chair spoke of, I think that would also be a great thing to add. As much information we can get online so that school districts and the public can see it and get the most current, up-to-date information, I think will be very helpful.
For those of you out there listening that are always looking for more information, check the Department of Finance website from time to time. I think the most recent budget letters, so every time we issue a budget letter, we put it on our website, gives a pretty good recap of what the Treasurer was able to do in terms of bond sales, the taxable bonds as well as the Build America bonds, and how those proceeds have been utilized and specifically how much of them went into the school facilities program. So I would also encourage you, if you're looking for even more information, please feel free to check finance. Senator Hancock.
Yeah. Again, also, this is a good report with steps forward in many, many areas. I have an informational question since I'm still relatively new to the board. When we get almost $2 billion, which is wonderful news, does it go, and they're for 3 different bond measures, essentially. Is it just for new and modernization, general construction? What happens to, say, the high performance account, the seismic account, some of those sub-accounts? How does, the gross sum of money get divided?
Those funds are available to any apportioned project out of those bond funds. So it can go for critically overcrowded schools programs in Prop 47 or 55. Any of the programs that are authorized under those bonds have funds available to them.
Great. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Are there other questions or comments from board members? Mr. Harvey.
I have one that came out of a discussion, a family discussion at Memorial Day. And I've got a question of staff, and I would like perhaps some input from all of you, because it was most interesting. We were talking about all the good things we try to do through our bond program, and I was able to allude to what we got from the Treasurer's sale and also the Buy America bonds. But I also went on to talk a little bit about something I mentioned a meeting or two ago, where our state architect took the time to develop a program that said if you are self-funded, you're not going to get dollars from the state, and you can put the shovel in the ground within 75 days, we're going to expedite that because you don't have to go to OPSC. It's consistent with getting money in the street. And let's go. It'll be a Category 1 fund. And I mentioned that, and my grandson said, they're certifying they're not coming to the state. That is your board, right, because they're self-funded. And I said, yeah, that's all part of it. The superintendent certifies that he's going to use his own dollars or federal stimulus dollars, but not any state bond money. What happens if they do? And I said, well, 99.9% of the districts would never do that. They're certifying that they're never going to go to OPSC. That was the promise they made. But, Grandpa, what if they do? So I ask, do we have a way of cross-referencing those Category 1 programs that DSA has stamped, put through the system, school districts are building their schools? What happens if they say, well, there's no sanction here? we'll apply to OPSC and get some bond dollars to make up half our costs. Do we have a way of tracking that? Do we have a way of saying, no, you can't? Do we have a way of saying to a cheater, no, you can't? Well, I want to give my grandson an answer.
Rob, before you address that point, I think we're going to have to hook. Was that your grandson, Scott? Yeah. I think we're going to have to hook Mr. Harvey's grandson up with Miss Chick, because I think he's got a future as an auditor.
Mr. Harvey, we do not, while we use common project tracking numbers with the Division of the State Architect, so a project that goes before the State Architect has got a number that transfers over to our organization, and that number is in common. Let's call that a Social Security number on the project. We don't have any mechanism to identify, or certainly haven't established any procedures with the Division of the State Architect to identify anyone who would maybe certify to the Division of State Architect one thing and then do another by submitting an application to our office.
But you have a common number. There's got to be a way of doing it. I don't know if any of you, I think that it's very remote, but I think, frankly, there should be a sanction. If somebody pledges they're not going to do it, but because there's nothing we've said to prohibit them, they come and get state bond money. Now, I don't know, I'm not asking for the answer today, but I'm wondering if there's not some way that between you and the Division of State Architect we can develop something that says, no, you're not going to do that.
Mr. Harvey, I just wanted to make sure we're not coming up with the problem in search of a solution. Is that the right term? I mean, is this? I mean, it's a valid concern, but do we actually have any complaints that this is actually a problem?
I can't cite any, but again, maybe it's the auditor in me. I mean, I'm trying to just say, do we have a mechanism that recognizes it somehow? Maybe we should hear some options.
Okay.
I'm not trying to make...
We're going to take public testimony on this, but since this wasn't on the agenda and we can't resolve it today, is this something that, Mr. Harvey, that we can follow up on?
I was asking for some of your input on it.
Sure. Mr. Duffy?
I'm hoping we can follow up on it. I'm not asking for action today.
Okay, great.
Thank you,
Mr. Duffy?
Mr. Chairman, members, Tom Duffy for CASH. It's important that you know that when we discovered that this concept of having your own cash not coming to the state, being shovel-ready, and therefore being first in line for approval, we objected to that verbally. We said that's not the way the program works, and in fact, we don't think that that's a prudent thing to do, because during the time when this first began, we were still struggling with even funding. You just heard from Mr. Cook the wonderful level of funding, but during the time that this was being discussed, for the first phases of it anyway, as we were understanding it before it was even in writing, we objected to it. When it took further shape, and we saw that there were 4 levels of identity for projects, basically those that could pay their own way and not come to the state at all, those that could bridge finance and come to the state later, those that could not pay their own projects but had to, in essence, be hardship projects or projects that could not even bridge, being in the 3rd category, and in the 4th category, time-sensitive projects. We said we really should have a discussion of this, because what this is doing is it's taking California back about 40 years and saying that your level of wealth in your school district gives you a priority in educating your children. When this continued on, it became something that was a written document. We sent a letter to the governor, and we identified that this was really something that we would not agree with and could not agree with, that it did indeed turn back time. And what I was referring to, although I didn't write this in the letter, was the Serrano decision when John Serrano, a parent in Baldwin Park, sued Ivy Baker Priest, the Treasurer of California, saying that the system of funding for operations is really unfair, because in Beverly Hills we have a lower tax rate and yield more money than in Baldwin Park that has a higher tax rate and yields less money. And the Supreme Court of California agreed with that. We think that there may be different issues here, but the concept is the same. I was responded to by Mr. Aguirre, who basically confirmed that this is very good policy, that it's having your own funds and being shovel-ready, being first to be approved, is really the way to get projects on the street. Our response to that is, because of circumstances in California that have been resolved to some degree and a large degree because of the bond sales, we held up a number of districts who had signed contracts from having funds and really put them at risk. And we've talked to you about that. So we think that there's really inconsistent thinking with this. And be pleased to dialogue with you, Mr. Harvey, at any length that you would like on this.
Let's do it, because let's be honest, this was initiated at a time when there was no bond money at all. And as a way of getting some programs going, this was conceived as something to do that. Now, maybe we can talk about whether it's still timely or not. But let's be fair about the fact that we had nothing going on. We had $2 billion of authorizations with no one doing anything at all. And this was a way of making sure some school districts got some money to build facilities for kids. So let's be honest about how it started, and I'll be very happy. We're going to have a later report on this, apparently, to dialogue with you about whether it's run its course or not. But it started in good faith.
And I will accept that assurance that that's how it started. But as you noted a moment ago, and I have to disagree with you, there was a lot going on in California with those apportionments. There was 1.4, as Rob said, $1.4 billion worth of projects that were under contract, and districts were struggling to take care of those projects. We're still hearing from districts that have had trouble bridging or moving them forward because the state didn't come through with the obligation that the statute basically put on the state. So I won't go further because you've got other items on the agenda, but our membership is very firmly against this policy. And we will talk with you further about this, and I'll call to make an appointment to talk to you. But
I thought we were. I'm sorry. I guess I may be the only member up here that's not on this. I thought weren't we doing FIFO? First in, first out. That was our policy, wasn't it?
That's regarding fund releases. That's true. What Mr. Harvey is talking about is an approach at the Division of State Architect.
Well, is that okay? So that's, but.
And we want that same thing at DSA, because that has been what has occurred there over time.
This sounds like obviously a very important issue, but I'm just wondering, is this issue with the Division of the State Architect, is that an issue that this body may address? I'm not sure I mean, it's an issue, it sounds like it needs to be addressed, but is that?
Well, Mr. Harvey, I think, was asking for some connection between DSA and OPSC for sanctions for someone that said, I will, that's what I was understanding anyway, yeah. Mr. Harvey, for someone that signed off and said, you know what, we're not going to come to the state for any funding. But then thereafter, for whatever reason, says, you know what, we really need to come to you for funding. And I think Mr. Harvey was asking for a mechanism to say, there's a transference of information to say there's a blockage that the district in those first categories, that the preference districts basically couldn't change their mind.
Okay.
And I believe that there's no substance within statute for the state to do this. Okay. And I believe, in fact, that statute supports our position by statute and also long practice.
All right. May I make this suggestion, Mr. Harvey? Since this wasn't on the agenda for today, and obviously you've got strong feelings about it, and it sounds like some of the school districts do, Rob, can we have this as an item for OPSC to look at, work with Mr. Harvey? I'd like Mr. Duffy representing Cash and others that have an interest in this item. Maybe we can have some analysis or write-up on this so that we could have more of a thoughtful discussion about it, because it's catching me off guard. I for one wasn't prepared to engage in the subject today, and it sounds like there's some interest in it. So was that agreeable to you, Mr. Harvey? Mr. Duffy, would you be willing to work with Mr. Harvey and OPSC on this issue?
I would be pleased to work with Mr. Harvey and Mr. Cook, Mr. Thorman, and yourself and whomever. And thank you very much again for listening to me.
Oh, of course, absolutely. All right, so Rob, where are we?
We're prepared to take up the consent agenda.
Oh, right. Could I just, I do
Senator
have
Hancock.
one other thing that got triggered here, and I think this is probably the appropriate place to raise it. As many of you know, I've been extremely concerned that we deal with the high performance aspects of school construction, that most particularly that we deal with maximizing energy conservation, which will help schools in the out years, and now that we're facing possible cuts, to education. Every dollar that we save in energy is really a dollar that can go to the classroom. And also, given the state's dire water situation, if we're going into construction and modernization, even if schools had not, in their original applications, had things like low-flow toilets and other water conservation measures, it would be good if they could incorporate them into their planning without having to go back through a big bureaucratic process. And I'm so pleased that we, sent out the high-performance grid, and we're looking at, and there was the letter that went out encouraging schools to look at this. But I'm hoping that we can be even more assertive on behalf of the state. And I'm wondering if we could get the staff to work with perhaps the implementation committee to send out another letter to schools recommending that they really look at particularly the toilets, the water conservation. I understand from talking with schools that irrigation is another major area where water is used and energy is used, and make some specific recommendations around the specific things they can do that are actually no more expensive than the low-flow toilets, for instance, are no more expensive than regular toilets, which use between 3 and 7.5 gallons for every flush. And literally, we're talking about building peripheral canals, so it seems to behoove us to try to mesh the issues here. And I don't think it would take a motion. I don't know if it would, to refer this to the staff and the implementation committee.
Senator Hancock, we're going to ask for more input on this. I think that's a great idea. I want to hear from Rob, but before I do,
yeah, Rob and
I saw that
finance
wanted to weigh in on this issue. Please identify yourself for the record.
We concur in identifying things that could save money for schools going forward. I think we just want to be cautious that we don't mandate, or it appear that we mandate certain activities, because then we could very well end up having to pay full cost of the difference in what they're doing now and what the cost would be. So we just want to be cautious. We agree with your goal.
Yeah, I think that's right. What we want to do is call to the attention of school officials who have many, many things on their mind. This is something they could do with a minimum effort and certainly minimum dollars, if any additional dollars.
Ms. Hancock, I think this is something that we can do. I would want to be sensitive to Ms. Orpez's comments. So is this, I don't know if your staff has drafted something or would like to work with OPSC to draft such a letter. I would only ask that letter be run, if it's agreeable to you, Senator Hancock, that letter be run by finances to make sure we don't create any mandate issues. Lord knows we're having a difficult time paying the bills presented to us as they are.
No, I understand. These are recommendations. Actually, I'd be happy to try to do that. Would we work with you, Ms. Urbizo? Mr. G,
you could work with Mr. Cook, and Jeannie, you want them to work with your staff or with you on that issue?
We'll all work together with OPSC to help you achieve
Okay,
that.
will you reach out to Senator Hancock's office then, and then we'll have something we can circulate for the whole board to see. Okay, great. Is there more questions or comments on that item? So we were going to go to the consent calendar, which we're going to take up, but we'll also leave the roll open so Senator Lowenthal can add on. Rob, you want to walk us through, is there anything on the consent calendar today that we needed to comment on?
It's simply ready for your approval.
Okay. Any board members have any questions or comments about the consent calendar? We have a motion. And we have a second. All in favor? Aye. Okay. Tab number 5 is the status of funds.
Good afternoon. Please turn to tab 5, page 108, for the status of funds. Proposition 1D, we will be processing $34.2 million of estimated unfunded approvals that represent 13 projects. Of that, additionally, we also will be moving forward $31.3 million of estimated unfunded approvals that represent 11 projects. In the high performance category, we also will be moving forward $2.6 million in estimated funding approvals. In the charter category, $10 million of unfunded approvals. And that leaves a balance in Proposition 1D of in excess of $3.8 billion. In Proposition 55, we'll be bringing back, returning funds to the program in new construction as a result of consent specials. And the COS item, it looks like we will be moving forward $342.4 million in estimated unfunded approvals. That leaves $552.1 million in Proposition 55. The Proposition 47 activity will be absorbing costs of $2 million in interest and administration costs. In addition, there will be $2.2 million returning back to the program as a result of closeouts and rescissions. That leaves available in Proposition 47, $934 million, in excess of $934 million. Flip to the next page, on stamp page 109, Proposition 1A activity, there will be $0.1 million of funds being returned as a result of rescissions and closeout. That leaves the balance of Proposition 1A of $22.5 million. And this leaves a total funds available for school facility program in excess of $5.384 billion. And the needs assessment category with the emergency repair program will be moving forward $13.8 million in applications. And in addition to that, we have estimate project approvals of $6.7 million, which leaves a balance of $37 million in emergency repair program funding. And the lease purchase program, there's no activity report, which leaves a balance of $36.8 million in the program. And as far as fund release activity, for the month of April, we moved forward $250 million, $950. And this concludes the status of funds.
Yes, Ms. Moore.
Thank you. I was wondering if we could have the $700 million of the critically overcrowded school funding money show that the board took the action to place that money into new construction so that anybody reading this can really follow the bouncing ball a little better.
I think we can represent that. As you may recall, the action that the board took on that was to authorize the $700 million, and we would move it on an as-needed basis so that we didn't run into arbitrage issues in matching those funds up with projects and also trying to control the issues around labor compliance program.
No, completely understand that. That's on the administrative side. This is a report, and I think that it would be better for us to actually show that the board took the action. Those funds now sit in a different category, right, so that everyone has, so that that's just readily known.
Well, actually, to address that question, we do have a footnote of a number sign symbol in that fund category. And so that number sign symbol, obviously, if you read the fine print, it says that we have motion to approve and transfer the $700 million.
I think we should make the transfer on the report. I think it would be clearer to the public that those funds are no longer in critically overcrowded schools fund. They are in the new construction fund. And this is simply a report. People rely on the report for their information, and I think that it should show the action of the board and not be a footnote. And tell me there's a problem with that.
I'm sure we can find a way to represent it on the report a little bit more obviously.
Thank you.
Further questions or comments of board members on the status of funds? This is a non-action item, so there's no motion necessary here. So the next item is, let's see. Yeah, it's item 6, but I think I can't. Ms. Garrity, how are we doing on conference committee? You think we're okay? Why don't we move to tab number? Let's hold off on number 6 and go to tab number 7, please. Facility inspection tool.
Good afternoon. Marsha Litzuk with the Office of Public School Construction. And the item in front of you today is the revisions to the facility inspection tool, otherwise conveniently known by some as the FIT. This particular evaluation tool and our item in front of you today is really a continuation of our implementation efforts for the settlement legislation in the case of Williams versus California. And the law requires the Office of Public School Construction to develop an evaluation mechanism for school districts and county offices of education to determine whether school facilities are maintained in good repair or not. And this tool has an impact throughout the state in determining good repair for both school districts and county offices of education that conduct inspections of the schools in deciles 1, 2, and 3 based on academic performance index. From the beginning of this function in our office, we have been very thankful for the participation of members of a work group that's been set up for the purpose of developing the initial tool, the report to the legislature and good repair standards. And that work group includes participants from county offices of education, American Civil Liberties Union, school districts, and CASH, and representative from the California Department of Education. This group's been very active, and the group actually recently addressed our office with the need for revisions to the facility inspection tool. And the main goal for the revisions is to address the inherent positive bias that we built into the tool via mostly the calculations that we built into the tool to determine the percentage of the facility that's in good repair. So we reconvened the work group in the fall and winter, went through several reiterations of revisions, tested them on actual inspections, and came up with a document that we are including. Starts on, the revisions begin on stamp page 116. I do want to point out that the revisions are, the tool has been in the field for 2 years, and we recognize that there's been a certain amount of expertise built in using the tool, and we want to point out that we're not changing the methodology for the inspections, we're not changing the layout of the inspection. The only thing that is really changing is the calculation at the end that an inspector would perform to determine the percentage of the facility that's in good repair. And it is important to address the positive bias that have been built in. It is important to note that there have been, in the past, instances where schools with extreme deficiencies were still able to get a good rating, and that really defeats the purpose of the settlement legislation that wanted to invoke change and improvement in the school facilities throughout the state. So with that, we ask that the board approves the changes. We will, upon approval by the board, provide outreach to school districts and county offices of education, and we also ask that if approval were to be granted, that the effective date of the change would be July 1st of this year to coincide with the beginning of the new fiscal year to make it easier for everybody to have a good cutoff date.
Thank you, Ms. Lutzak. Has there been any opposition expressed to the use of this new tool?
No, we have discussed it at the implementation committee and provided examples actually on how the inspections would work under the old method versus the new method, and that's been discussed at the May implementation committee meeting.
All right, very good. So there's no opposition. Question to board members? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve item 7? We have a motion.
Second, and a comment, just that for the record that we received a letter of support from Brooks Allen of the ACLU in support of this item, which I think is important, as they were a critical part of putting this program together.
Excellent. Thank you, Ms. Moore. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay,
Thank you.
Item 7 is approved. I'm sorry, was there a question about the, yes. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to move on then to item number 9, Aspire Public Schools.
The next, go ahead, 1, and Barbara Kampminer of our charter program.
Actually, the next 2 items, tab 9 and 10, both deal with the use of remaining funds in the charter school facility program. Currently, the board has approximately $46 million under Proposition 47 and an additional $24 million available from Proposition 1D. Tab 9 addresses a request by a charter school organization to use part of the remaining funds from Prop 1D, while Tab 10 discusses the use of the remaining funds in Proposition 1D pending the outcome of Tab 9 and the remaining funds in Proposition 47. Both of these items were discussed at the April Implementation Committee meeting, as well as a separate meeting with the charter school community. While we didn't have general consensus on either of the meetings, we did provide various options that are discussed and are outlined in the items before you. So specifically with tab 9, beginning on stamp page 140, the Aspire Public Schools is requesting to use part of the remaining $24 million under 1D to fund the Clarendon project, which is the next one in line to receive funding. The Clarendon project requested a preliminary apportionment under Proposition 1D in the amount of approximately $42 million. However, since the board only had $24 million available, the project was not funded. Aspire did receive a preliminary apportionment for another project under 1D, namely the Antonio Maria Lugo Academy project, for a total of $32 million. Aspire is requesting a reduction in site acquisition allowances for both projects to enable the board to award a preliminary apportionment for the Clarendon project.
There is precedent from Proposition 55 regarding this issue. The initial request for the last project that was funded in that round did exceed the funds that were available at the time, and staff offered the charter school the choice to reduce their request in order to receive funds. This offer was not made to Aspire in the Prop 1D filing round, as it did appear that the funding deficiency would impede their ability to actually complete the project. However, Aspire has justified their request based on reduced land costs for both of the projects, while maintaining the same construction budget that was originally proposed. The options presented for the board's consideration on this item are to either approve or deny Aspire's request, and if the board chooses to approve this request, the approval wouldn't guarantee a timeline for funding, and it would be considered an unfunded approval. For tab 10, as Juan mentioned, it deals with the remaining charter school funds, and in this item there are several options that came out at our stakeholder meetings. Staff is recommending option 1, and what option 1 does is establish a new filing round that would open on July 1st of this year, and it holds that filing round open for 8 months after preliminary apportionments are awarded. The benefits to this option include that it is equitable to all applicants, including those charter schools that were unable to apply for the previous rounds of funding. Also, this funding round can occur quickly by using the existing requirements and regulations that are already in place for the program. Keeping the item open for a limited term balances the desire for an unfunded list, which was something that we did hear from a lot of the stakeholders, and it balances it with the need to apply the funding system that is currently in existence using data that is reasonably current. Also, keeping the item open for a limited term potentially allows for the redistribution of any remaining Proposition 55 funds that may come back into the program after that filing round closes out. And this concludes our presentation on both of these items, and we'd be happy to address any questions.
Is there somebody here from Aspire that would like to address the board?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Charles Robitaille from Aspire Public Schools. I'm the Director of Real Estate. Really, I think rather than being repetitive here, the main thing I would like to bring out here is the apportionments that were originally being entertained by the state and the State Allocation Board were funds that were really, for lack of a better word, inflated from what the actual funds we really needed. As a result of that, particularly in the land acquisition side of it, there was something like $15 million on each side on properties that we know we could acquire in Los Angeles for somewhere in the $4 to $5 million range, possibly $6 million at the most. So we were able to look at the numbers that we were apportioned and say, look, I don't need all this for land. Why don't we take that on both sides, the Antonio Maria Lugo apportionment and the Clarendon apportionment, combine those and put it back into the Clarendon apportionment where I could then fund another much-needed facility in Huntington Park. It's terribly overcrowded, and I know we could really, the community could really use this facility. So to that end, I respectfully request approval of your of this request. So hopefully we can get this done.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Brown. Kathleen? Kathleen.
Yes, Chuck. Mr. Robitaille, I do have a question. I just wanted to ensure that the reduction is actually in the site acquisition cost, and it is not in reduced acreage. for these projects. I'm aware of the acreage amounts. Currently, they are small. We would have an educational concern if they were reduced. So I just wanted that assurance.
It's a reduction in dollars, not size of the site.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Senator.
I would move approval of that item on the Aspire and on alternative 1 on the rest of the report.
I'd second.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Was there additional public comment? Yes, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Colin Miller. I'm with the California Charter Schools Association, and we do support the Aspire request as well. And on the other item of the reallocation funds, we really appreciate the work that the staff have done. Juan and Barbara have gone around the state talking to charter schools. It is clear that there isn't any really strong consensus on how to reallocate these funds. We're a little bit concerned with option 1 just because it does seem to create a whole new process for what is relatively a very, very small amount of funds. Right now, there are about 50 projects that were not funded under Prop 1D that already have applications in. We think there might be some way to review those and really fund down that list with just kind of an updating of that information that might be a little more efficient than reopening a whole new application process. The concern, of course, is that, with schools facing the budget situations their resources are tight. The resources needed to really pay attention and put in a brand new application for this program is pretty extensive. And we're really looking at money that was going to fund maybe 2 or 3 projects. So, we're looking at staff looking at, 50 to 100 new applications for the point of, funding 2 or 3 projects. So there may be a more efficient way to get at it, and we'd like to look at that. We also would just note that if you do want to go with option 1, that we would request that you not go hard and fast to the 8-month limit on that, but that you just allow whatever those projects are to be considered once the 55 funds are reverted to the extent that there are any, so that you don't have to go through this process again, so that you actually have a process in place that will automatically fund those projects once those funds come back.
Okay, those are excellent suggestions.
Can we have staff respond to, it sounds like logical and some efficiencies could be achieved. If we could hear from staff, maybe modify the motion to reflect that.
We can certainly go down the list under Proposition 1D. One of the things that we would need to clarify is if we update the information, part of the process for the charter schools is that we use information that changes annually, which is at this point outdated. So we would have to freeze the list, and everybody would be in the same understanding that we're not going to update for any of the projects. So we can certainly do that. Another component of this is that these charter schools are still going to have to go through another financial soundness review by the Treasurer's Office. So it's not just a simple matter of going down the list, because these apportionments have been made some time ago. We would ask the Treasurer's Office to reevaluate to make sure that they're still financially sound.
Mr. Harvey? One other point, if I could. It seems to me the other issue that I was wrestling with, because I certainly saw it's not a lot of money, how many schools are we really going to fund? The efficiency trade-off with the equity trade-off. That is, by at least opening it up, districts that did not apply last time, or not ready to apply, could at least, if we open it up, start at ground zero and compete with all others. And since the information is dated and you've got this other thing with the treasurer, I'm comfortable with option 1.
Okay, so, Ms. Brownlee.
Just before we vote on this measure, I just wanted to say that I've had an opportunity to visit several Aspire schools up in Oakland, California, and they really are doing some, I believe, some really extraordinary work, and so I just want to compliment them on the work they are doing.
Excellent. So, members, where are we on the motion then?
Mr. Chair, if I can we just clarify that we're taking the action on tab 9 first, and then moving on to tab 10?
Correct. Okay. So we had a motion to approve the staff recommendation on item 9 for Aspire, and then we had some suggestions made, and I think Mr. Torkelson wanted to know if we could, if we might need to modify the motion to incorporate some of that. Rob, can you help us with that?
Okay. Well, as Juan laid out, The approach that we would need, okay, if we were to freeze on and just apply any available funds to those who applied under Prop 1D, we'd have to take a look at those who are out of the money on Prop 1D, update information from them, and retumble that list because the information is dated, and they would also need to be submitted before the California School Finance Authority and the Treasurer's Office for financial review. The benefit to that is it's faster. It reduces the application period for, I mean, people don't have to go through a whole new application. The downside of that is it does not create an opportunity for anybody who wasn't ready in the last round to come in to compete for funding. And it was that issue that really kind of turned, given that we had dated information in the old applications and that we were cutting out anyone who might have an opportunity to come in now. Those were the reasons why we're proposing option one. It's not, I mean, there are winners and losers in both cases. It's not clear cut.
Is it clear cut that if if the ones that have been previously approved went and fully qualified with the treasurer's review, et cetera, that there would be no money left for any new schools to apply? Is that clear cut? Or?
Yeah, we're dealing with, if you approve the Aspire request, there's a little over $50 million that's available. And I think Mr. Robitaille accurately, or pardon me, that does turn into about 2 or 3 projects out there. It's not a lot to work with.
And how many projects are on the waiting list?
There are about 50 that were not funded in the Prop 1D filing round, so there are about 50 on the existing list.
Well, it seems to me that that makes the case for taking the top 3 of the 50 and moving forward because of the economic stimulus, if nothing else, that we get from getting the money out on the street. Because if it is first come, first served, other people who apply are going to just get on the list, right? Waiting for more bonds or more bonds to be sold.
I think
So
that.
I think the suggestion that was made was very good.
If you could just go down the list, I'd agree with you. But what I heard is you've got to go back out and validate the information. You've got to go to the treasurer for a financial check. It's almost like you're starting fresh, and by going to the old list, you're not allowing those that were outside the bubble from competing. So,
But what are we going to do? Move somebody else up ahead of the 50 projects that were in line?
based
It
on
sounds
new
to me like-
information and new financials, that's what we do.
Okay, now I thought I understood that it was first come, first on the list. No, if you qualify.
This program's actually very competitive, given the limited amount of funding and the large number of applications. There are criteria set out in the statute that define how we are to rank the projects if we are oversubscribed. So there are about, I think it's 12 categories in which an application can be funded. So if we use the Proposition 1D list with updated information, it will change the order of the projects. So it may not just be the next few that are in line unless the old information is used. But the old information is, I believe it's over 2 years old at this point.
So you would have to update it.
That would be a concern. Mr. Miller from the association also brought up an issue about extending the 8-month deadline if the board were to select option 1. And that is something that would be possible to hold that open potentially. The only concern we had there is the same as with using the old data. We don't know when Proposition 55 funds will become available or if there will be any available. So it would need to be a decision whether or not we freeze the data points to hold that open, knowing that the data is going to get older and older as that date gets pushed out. But that could be considered.
Okay, so we're getting some good information here. I want to follow on Senator Hancock's comment. Is there a way to proceed, sort of a modified one alternative, to allow those districts that had qualified before to see if they still test out as being fiscally sound and ready to go, since they had competed and had gotten in the queue to allow that vetting and process to take place, but to have the rest of the one recommendation kick in if they're found not to be able to move forward and not to be able to use the money, then it would open it up. I do hear the point that Senator Hancock made that these projects competed, they were ready, they may indeed still be ready, and if they are ready, gets the money out there faster and gets something that had been deemed appropriate to move ahead, deemed appropriate at one time to move ahead.
Rob, what do you recommend? To try to accommodate the points that Senator Hancock.
If it's the will of the board to use simply those that were not funded through that applied under Proposition 1D and were not funded, fell out of the money, we can execute. That's an option before this board. We can execute that. Again, we would update the information, and and there were 50 projects that were outside of the funding, so it's certainly a large pool. I'm sure that with 2 or 3 fundable projects in there, there will be viable projects in there that will absorb those funds without any question.
But the result of that then would be Aspire wouldn't get the money, correct?
No, that's
different issue.
If the board adopts staff's recommendation under number 9 tonight, they were the next in line under the old information. They'd get an unfunded approval as a result of that action.
I just have a comment on the retumbling. That I see a potential issue that people were in line. They just like Aspire. We're not retumbling Aspire with the recommendation that the staff has. That seemed to have support here. And I could see that causing some angst. So somebody gets tumbled out of being in slot for funding because we update their information. If we go for option, I think it's 3 that's talking about using the existing list, I would be more inclined, unless staff tells us otherwise, that we use the information and go down the list accordingly. Otherwise, if we're retumbling, why aren't we at option 1, which is really both retumbling and opening up for those charters that may not have been able to say, I've been in business for 2 years and avail themselves to this program, which is one of our requirements, because it's been 2 years since we had this funding round, so to speak. Is that?
Yeah, let me speak to the first part of your comments. You may or may not recall that a couple of months ago we had a charter school applicant under Prop 1D who was well out of the money that came before this board to appeal the use of a different year's data that would have put them up into the money. Having said that, I expect that the demand will be that we retumble the Prop 1D list. That particular project would score much higher today and would be likely eligible for funding. If we don't retumble that list, they won't be.
But I think the question is,
so I expect an appeal. Let's put it that way. I expect an appeal of that.
Yeah. Do we have to retumble the list? Is that a decision the board can make?
Absolutely. Yes. The board can make that decision.
Okay.
Can we pass item 9 and then come to a separate motion on 10? I'm leaning now more towards the idea that those that have been in line, if they prove out financially sound, had gotten a prior approval, they're on a list, they may indeed be more ready to go, and to have them go back through an application process and doesn't seem as efficient as letting the ones that had gone through before and had some level of approval prove their financial soundness to proceed with the treasurer's review, but not have to go back through. They'll have to provide updated financials, but they won't have to go back through a whole application process. That's where I sort of lean now on item 10, and it's along the lines of Senator Hancock's comments.
We still have a closeout item 9, have we?
Right. Let's do number 9. Close that out. I'll separate it and move 9 separately now.
Senator Ferguson, was your motion then to approve the staff recommendation on item 9?
To approve Aspire's application, yes.
Okay, so is there any objection in the board to approving item number 9? Okay.
Option one.
Clarify what we're doing.
Option 1, item 9, staff recommendation is option 1. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, all right. Now, item 10, is there a motion on the floor?
I'm trying to determine if item 3 or choice 3 gets to the kind of discussion we had or that I was expressing. My preference would be to allow those that had made it through the process before and had been approved, but for the availability of funding were not approved, but to have a caveat that they must meet the financials clearance to make sure they're a viable project still, and that the institution's viable to continue its charter plan.
And if I could add to, at least insert the comment, that I do believe it, just from a standpoint of equity, that we will probably need to retumble that data. I mean, basically get updated data from them on which they would be judged. Because I know that there are projects with later data score higher, and they will be before this body at some point.
Rob, which of the 4 options that are presented in the agenda, which option is closest to the view Mr. Torlickson's expressed, and how would we have to amend that in order to conform to what Mr. Torlickson has suggested?
It would be option 3.
Option 3. And Juan, can we take option 3 as is, or do we need to amend it? Option 3 says continue the funding down the list from the May 2008 preliminary apportionment item using either the existing or a revised funding priority order using updated data for the funding system.
It would be up to the board to keep it as is or to update it.
I'm sorry?
It would be up to the board to keep the data as is.
We need to make that decision now, to either keep the data as it is, or is the term retumble?
Yes.
Okay. So what is the will? What is the will of the board? Do we want to? Yes, Ms. Fuller.
The door. We need to get whatever money out there we can get. So to me, I'm just trying to find what is the shortest, quickest way to get money out to people who are ready without creating a situation for ourselves that we're giving old figures funding that probably don't match because either land values went down or construction projects went down or whatever. So in that case, if that's what one does, if that's what option 1 does, then I'm willing to support 1, even though at a later date I would really like to get in line better thing. But I don't think I don't think at this time we want to hold things up to retumble the whole thing or risk by not retumbling it not an accurate matchup of the funding given. So tell me, is one that, or is one of the other options that? Which is the fastest, that gives us the least risk of having funding that doesn't really fit because of old data?
Just to clarify the program a little bit, these are considered to be preliminary apportionments. What they are is they're basically set-asides on estimated cost. Charter schools then have 4 to 5 years to go and get the necessary plan approvals to come in with a construction-ready project, if you will. So at this point, it's just a set-aside and it's based on estimated cost. So the data that we're talking about is mostly due to changes in free reduced lunch data and enrollment data, not necessarily hard costs in terms of land values. Just for example, the cost that we use to determine the site acquisition allowance is based on a median cost of an acre of land. Because at this point, it's at the very early stages of the program. They may not have a site selected. So we set aside a certain amount of money just to get an idea of what they're going to need in 4 or 5 years.
So
it doesn't stay tied up for 5 years then because you set this amount aside, or it does?
It's a reservation of funds. and the total amount is fixed for 5 years, but when they come in with the plans, we take a look at the actual plans and determine the actual cost, just like we would with any other typical new construction modernization project. So the reserves say $2 million, then they come in with the plans and we take a look at the actual cost of the project, and then we adjust accordingly.
I wasn't sure if your question was fully answered, because you asked, is number 1 or number 3 closer to that approach with updating the data somewhat?
I'm sorry, may I ask a question? I think we're having a great discussion, but would it be appropriate for us to check back in with the Charter Association, since it's their facilities that are on the list? I don't know if they want to weigh in at this point, or, I mean, maybe they can help us.
We just finished the 1 or 3.
Maybe they can help us get to closure on this issue in a way that would be helpful.
Thank you. I appreciate the conversation you're having, because it's very consistent with the same conversation we've been having with our
sorry,
members.
could you identify yourself again?
Yeah,
sir?
Colin Miller with the Charter Schools Association.
Thank you, Mr. Miller.
And it's very consistent with the type of conversation we've been having for the last several months with the staff and with our members, and they've been having with our members as well. And there isn't a clear, shining, perfect way to do this. And so, I just want to be clear. I wanted to share some concerns and some issues around that. I don't know that we have a particularly strong recommendation on one way that's absolutely better than another. The staff, I think, has done a great job in laying out those options for you. What I was suggesting was something that looked a little bit more like option 3, probably, just in terms of trying to lay out what you're doing. Option 3 with reshuffling the data, although I'm hearing some good arguments for not reshuffling the data at this point as well. So.
Let me try something.
Helpful, so,
let me try something. I too believe, having heard the discussion, that 3 is probably the quickest way of getting it out. And if you start with the existing funding priority, that locks that in. And then the question is, do you want to update the information because of the concerns you articulated? I'm going to suggest, if you take a look at number 3, that after using, you strike either, and you strike after existing or a revised. So it would read.
Strike either, and then what?
Or a revised.
Strike or a revised.
So it would read, continue funding down the Prop D list from the May 08 preliminary apportionment item using the existing funding priority. You could put a period there if you don't want to update the information. But I heard convincing arguments for the need to update, and if you want to update it, you would say, using the updated data for the funding system. And I think you strike those 4 words, and I think you've got it.
All right. Is that a motion?
It's a motion.
Do we have a second? We have a second. Is there additional comment by board members? We have a motion and a second.
I'm sorry, one comment on that. If you update the data, it changes the funding order. So I don't know that that motion would actually work, because you're updating.
All right, so fine. So at the end of priority, we're going to put a period.
That would, I was trying to address the concerns of Member Fuller, but get it out the quickest possible, you put the period after order, and I'll amend my motion.
Jean, are you okay with that?
Yes.
Okay.
I do
Ms.
have
Moore.
a comment, and I'm looking at the long haul. And the long haul is, first of all, it's my understanding this program goes to the back of the line in terms of any funding that's going to occur with it, with the situation of pooled money investment. Is that correct? So they haven't been apportioned. These projects haven't been apportioned yet, and they will be waiting their turn for pooled money investment release of funds. Is that correct?
That's correct. These are when we make an award, it will be an unfunded approval.
And there could be more than $50 million coming back to this program, depending upon what happens with other charter schools out there, and if they, adjust their cost or revise, there could be more money coming back. So we are locking in a subset of charters that have that get to compete for that, versus option 1 that allows for more charters to compete. And I just want to be clear, because it isn't, they're not going to be shovel ready they have 5 years to get shovel ready. So I'd like to look more at the long term of what's fair to charters. Now, if the Charter Association says they want to go with option 3, and that reduces the universe. And I think that's what you said, Colin. Is that what you're recommending?
Yeah, I'm more for the expediency and the trying to get these things moving a little quicker. It seems like opening up to a full application for just 3 or 4 projects seems a bit not very practical.
Okay. So that is the lay of the land. If you want to continue with the motion, we make it in. I prefer option 1, and I do because I think that there are charters that I think that there's going to be more money coming back to the program. I don't think there's a hurry in my mind because they got to get in line at the end of the pooled money investment funds, and they have 5 years to perfect their project. So with that, and I agree that it may only be 3 projects now, but it could be 12 projects when we're all said and done. And we excluded some people from the table. So that's where I'm coming from.
Without looking wishy-washy, I may want to withdraw my motion because I was really comfortable with option 1 at the get-go. I mean, I articulated
Well, that was the first motion we had.
Well, we could try having a couple of votes here to see where the votes line up. I'm willing to go. I don't have a dog in this fight, which is maybe not the right analogy, so I'm happy to go along with any of these motions. I was prepared to support number 1 too, but I was also ready to prepare number 3 as amended. So we do have a motion on the floor for number 3 as amended. Are we going to vote on that motion, or did you want to withdraw it, or what are we doing, folks? Okay, you're going to.
I would like to withdraw the motion.
Okay, the staff recommendation was item number 1. Ms. Moore has explained that she's supporting item number 1. I think Mr. Torrickson was leaning towards item number 3.
Yeah, I'll replace the motion that was just withdrawn, just to put it out there, and we'll just cast the votes and see.
So Mr. Torrickson,
there's no clear-cut deal, but I think
Mr. Torrickson is going to move item 3 as amended by Mr. Harvey. Let's have a vote on that first. Please call the roll.
Okay. Senator Hancock? Assemblymember Fuller? No. Assemblymember Brownlee? Assemblymember Torlickson? Scott Harvey?
No.
Kathleen Moore?
No.
Rosario Gerard? Tom Sheehy?
Aye.
Okay.
Okay, so
well, the motion fails.
That motion fails. Is there another motion?
I would move option 1.
Mr. Harvey's moved option 1. Is there a second?
I'll second and also a caveat that if there's any way that we can streamline the process, given Mr. Miller's comments, that staff try and do that.
Okay, so we have a motion and we have a second by Ms. Moore with a request to try to streamline as much as possible. Secretary, is there any opposition to this motion? Okay, let's have a roll call vote.
I just have one more clarifying question. So on option 1, will we require updating data or retumbling? Yes, we will. Okay. All right, thank you.
Please call the roll.
Okay. Senator Hancock? Assemblymember Fuller?
Aye.
Assemblymember Brownlee?
Aye.
Assemblymember Torlickson? Scott Harvey? Aye. Kathleen Moore?
Aye.
Rosario Gerard? Tom Sheehy?
Aye.
And that motion passes.
Okay, so thank you. So that's all for item 10.
You've had several good shots at that other one.
Okay, members, we're going to go to item number 14. And then after this item, we're going to go back to the beginning of the agenda and start picking up some of the items that we passed over. Item number 14, implementation of SB 1556. Mr. Morales.
This item includes proposed regulatory amendments to implement Senate Bill 1556, which allows elementary school districts that meet certain criteria to establish eligibility on a high school attendance area basis. Staff has made the minor necessary changes to implement the bill. We've presented this item to the implementation committee and have received or heard no objections or concerns with this item. So with that, the item is ready for your approval.
We have a motion to approve. We have a second by Ms. Gerard. Is there any public comment on this item? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Okay, that's item number 14. Mr. Cook, have you already handled the general obligation bond report?
No, we have not. Do you want to go to the report?
Well, why don't we take care of the two reports? Maybe by then Senator Lowenthal will be here. If not, we'll go ahead and go back to the beginning of the agenda. We have item number 16, and we have item number 17. Why don't you start with number 17?
Okay. The general obligation bond report is a statutorily required report that involves both Propositions 55 and 1D. The Office of Public School Construction is required to bring forth a report to the legislature. This report has been issued to the legislature. That details every single project that is funded under either of those two bond programs. One update that we've done to that particular report, and it's a mere 200 pages because we've been kind of busy and we put out a lot of money, is we have done summaries by county so that folks can take a good look at the activity that occurs within given counties. We've, to the extent that we have data available, we have identified dollars per acre and additional other information that you can, in fact, if I can turn your attention to page 13 of the report, this is under tab 17.
Sorry, page 13?
Page 13 of the report under tab 17.
Okay.
This is a statewide snapshot of funding under Proposition 55. As you will note, there more than $5 billion in new construction, funding more than 1,100 projects.
Sorry, Rob, I'm having a hard time seeing that. Where's the $5 billion?
It's up at the very top of that page. Attachment. It's noted Attachment B, Proposition 55 summary.
Thank you.
But the totals overall, and just to go quickly to the summary, more than $9.3 billion involving 2,950 projects out there. The number of acres acquired, nearly 4,500 acres acquired under the various programs, and then we have a breakdown of site funds per acre that have been involved in those. That's just a very high-level statewide summary of what was done under Proposition 55, and then a breakout county by county by county throughout the state,
okay,
to help folks see what's going on in various locales.
Where the money's going.
We provide similar information for Proposition 1D in this report.
Questions or comment from board members? Yes, Mr. Harvey. There is no action required on this item. It is informational. Mr. Harvey.
Just a quick question, given what you said about posting things on the web. I noticed that the letter that was sent to Ledge Council from Mr. Bush talks in terms of, in keeping with our commitment to encourage conservation, we have posted this report to our website. Now, can we similarly do that when we send this report to the Joint Budget Committee or whomever we send this to, so we're not sending 200 pages to the legislature?
Yeah, that's the consistent approach with these sorts of reports.
So yes. That's what we do.
That's what we have done.
And you just gave us the 200 pages.
That's correct. Because you're kind of old school.
I know I am. But I can be much better at being on the web. You can perhaps. Hey, send me my stuff on the web.
I want you to know, Mr. Cook, I recycle my notebooks. I do.
We appreciate it.
Good. So do our other board members.
Yeah.
Are there other questions or comments on this item? Seeing none. Sorry, we're going to go back to the beginning of the agenda and start. Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. Item 16. We're going to do that first. This is the report on how many times we don't report. Is that what it is? Let's do. I tried to skip it again, but I got caught.
Yeah.
Item 16.
It's kind of like it keeps on clicking. Anyway, this report has been before the board on a prior occasion. We provided for your information. It is a simple attempt to capture information on how many times we revisit issues, and this particular report all by itself has been revisited several times. So anyway, it's for your information.
Rob, there's information here. I'm sure the board members can draw their own conclusions. Is there anything that jumps out at you that is informative for the board in terms of an analysis of this data? I mean, what does it tell us?
The key thing that jumps out at me is that issues don't die at this board. That's the...
Unless and until someone gets 6 votes. That's the key.
Okay. All right. Well, that's good to know. Any questions or comments on this item? You can now officially take this off the agenda now that we've heard the report. We're going to go ahead now back to item number 6, which is the financial needs of the State Relocatable Classroom Program. Is this an action item, Rob, or is this just a report?
Given the budget control language that's in effect, this is an informational item.
Okay. Ms. Moore?
We've commented on this last time, I appreciate that the control language for the education code is in here, and I think to the information that we'll revisit this issue in December. So it's in the order that we asked for it to come back to us, and I for one, appreciate that.
And we're going to hear this again then in December so that the plan is not to be preempted by the governor's budget. Is that right? That's the plan? We had a pretty full discussion about this last time. Ms. Brownlee, I think you might have come in on the tail end and missed it. But because of, we've had a rather unusual budget process the last 18 months. So hopefully going forward, we'll be back on more of a regular schedule. Okay, so hearing no further questions or comments on item 6.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, did I miss something? I thought item 6 was an action item. There are recommendations.
It's really not.
No, the budget control language is
preempted us.
Preempts action.
$50 fine, Nanjo. Okay. Okay, so at this point in the agenda, here are the items that we haven't heard yet. We have not heard Murrieta, which I'd like to close out today. We've not heard Glendale. I think there may be enough support to close Glendale today, but Mr. Weiland had asked to be put over, so I'm open to what my colleagues want to do on that one. Of course, we need Senator Lowenthal.
Mr. Chairman, on that point, is there a way that we could communicate through one of our staff members to Senator Weiland's office to see if there's a way to let him know that the votes are apparently here and there's an interest in moving ahead? Would he mind? He already cast a vote in favor of this, so I'm just curious if we could get feedback and a green light. We always like to honor a colleague's request to put something over, but if he's in favor of expediting it and getting it off the agenda, that would be cool too.
Some of these school districts that are here today have made multiple trips to Sacramento to get their item closed out, like Murrieta, so I'm hoping we're going to resolve that issue today, and I think it'd be great also, since Glendale's made several trips up here to resolve their issue today as well, if we can. But I want to be respectful. If one of you weren't here, I'd want to respect your wishes. Ms. Hancock?
I just wondered if Glendale is here.
Is Glendale here today?
They weren't here.
Is there a representative from Glendale Unified here today? Because if they're not here, we're putting them over.
I need to check the public
bathroom. You're going to check. That's a first. I've not heard that. Yes, Ms. Brown.
Well, I was just going to say, I don't know whether they're here, but I was told in advance of the meeting that we weren't going to be doing Glendale.
Okay. All right.
And I know that there have been people who have come to my office to speak to me about Glendale. I do not see them in the audience, so I am suspect that they are not represented here. And I certainly want to move ahead with Murrieta, but I think the other one should be postponed until
under the
all who are concerned can
Ms.
be
Brownlee,
present.
all I could say to that is under the general topic of no good deed goes unpunished, why don't we just take it up and deny it right now? Okay, if any of you here were waiting for Glendale, we're going to put that item over. So that leaves us with Murrieta, seismic, the report from OSA. Why don't we take up, well, I know we got lots of interest in that one. Why don't we move to the, and we also have closed session we'd like to do, but we're definitely not going into closed session without our full membership. So why don't we move to the mercy clause issue? I think Mr. Cook has some statistics here he'd like to go over with us. And is that item 12? Is that tab 12? Is that? Yes, we noticed closed session. We're going to make we have a recommendation to the board today to make an appointment for our AEO, for our interim AEO, sorry. So this mercy clause issue, I think, was in response to a request by Senator Hancock at the last meeting, I believe. And that's correct. So, Rob, you want to go ahead and walk us through this item?
Yes. If you turn behind tab 12 and page 151 of your book, we lay out, provide some context. Many of the members of this board are new and have not seen us in normal times. But there we go. And we may not see normal times for a while yet. But to provide some context on the program, the voters have been generous enough to authorize more than $35 billion in this program over the last 10 years, almost 11 years now. $29 billion of that has been apportioned out for more than 9,000 projects, and that all by itself is a notable achievement. For calendar year 2008, this program issued more than $5 billion in funding to nearly 1,300 projects, and you see detail there on the various categories. And over the last few months, we've been making unfunded approvals, and that the tally is pushing 1,400 projects since January of 2008. Of those nearly 1,400 projects, 11 individual projects have come forward as appeals before this board in that time frame, representing less than 1% of the overall projects and a little over 1% of the funds that this board has apportioned.
Okay, so let me get this straight. You're telling me that out of 1,400 projects that's come to OPSC that have gone through your process, that a fraction of 1%, less than 1% of those projects, only 11 of them, have actually had to come before this board for some sort of appeal. In other words, you've been able to, at OPSC, actually resolve the problems and work with the districts to get the issues resolved so that those issues could go forward. Is that right?
That's accurate.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure I understood that. That's a pretty impressive statistic, at least in my mind. Now, please go ahead, Mr. Cook.
Much of that success is due to a fair amount of flexibility in education and outreach to districts and internal processes that assist districts in moving through to this board to fund, ideally on our consent agenda, which is where the overwhelming majority of our funds are allocated. Now, in there, and I certainly like to call this program the crown jewel of California's public infrastructure programs, and I think that's borne out by our success.
I think Will Kempton would take exception to that, Rob, but you're welcome to you're entitled to your opinion. Our
part of the outreach in the last calendar year, our staff conducted nearly 200 outreach efforts involving going out to 42 of the 58 county offices of education and in multiple venues to educate individuals on school districts and others on the program. Staff also delivered trainings and presentations at six different events sponsored by various organizations, including the Coalition for Adequate School Housing, the Collaborative for High Performance Schools, and the California Green School Summit, as well as along with the Division of the State Architect. Internal processes that we have that manage issues are also, we have a number of processes that help districts get through successfully to funding. Fully 39, we track on a routine basis the number of applications that come into us insufficient. 39% of projects come in incomplete at our door. Between notifications and working with districts, we get that to a 97% pass rate at the door. The other 3% are returned to districts without prejudice. They're able
Sorry,
to...
I apologize. I didn't understand that. If 39% show up and they aren't fully complete, how do you get it down to 3?
We provide notifications for districts. We help them get, we identify the documents, necessary documents that they need to get into us, and we provide an opportunity for those districts to get a complete application before us so that we can put that on our workload.
Okay. All right. Go ahead. Please continue.
And again, we achieve a 97% success rate at that level. And then we have multiple processes. I know, Kathleen, you're quite familiar with them, but the folks in the field know these as 15-day letters and 4-day letters that are opportunities for folks to provide additional information along the way to help to get their projects ready and prepared before this board. Those processes are essential for us to be able to bring projects forward in date order received and get them before this board in a definable and predictable time frame. And those processes are fairly successful. Anyway, with all of that, we do wind up with a few projects that wind up before this board for appeals, and they're, as you well know, fairly substantial discussions that engage on that. We believe that the current processes work pretty well. And this board stands as the Court of Appeal, the appeal for those projects that we can't quite make work. And so, anyway, now if the board is interested in pursuing the notion of a mercy clause, the Education Code has a model in it for that, and it's a model that's used for waivers at the State Board of Education, and that statute is behind this item here in your board books, but it lays out a process by which the State Board of Education is able to waive statute and regulation in other aspects of the Education Code. There are a list of exceptions. Such large global issues as issues involving civil rights are exempted. Issues increasing cost to the state can't be waived. And there are specific programs that cannot be waived, but it does provide a fair amount of flexibility within the rest of the Education Code. And we would propose that if the board wishes to pursue a mercy clause, that it would be a legislative solution modeled after the State Board of Education's approach.
Just a comment on the comment was that it specifically the State Board of Education is prohibited from waiving any issue concerning the State Allocation Board program. So that is one that the State Board of Education never hears. And by law, it's precluded from hearing any waivers. I think appropriately so, because this board hears those. So just with that caveat on what they can waive.
Senator Hancock.
Yeah, I was very impressed also with the large percentage of applications in this very complicated area that go through and are handled in a very expeditious manner. And really, I think that just the discussions that have taken place in the very few meetings I've attended have really revolved around substantial compliance, because I believe the board, I don't know if the executive director or the staff have the ability to determine what is substantial compliance. And I don't think we need a legislative solution necessarily. I was thinking that maybe we could just refer this to the Rules and Procedures Committee to see if they don't think that substantial compliance is an adequate way for us to resolve most of these things. And if they should think that we need to go further, we could, but
so Ms. Hancock is recommending that we move this item for further review.
That we simply send it to a subcommittee to look and see. I mean, the one thing we don't want is to I mean, I think a little discussion of the definition, perhaps, of substantial compliance could take care of this.
Tom, or Mr. Chairman? Appreciate that you raised this issue, Senator Hancock, and since I've been back on the board, we've had at least 2 and 3 very contentious and unclear situations where we felt that there were, like the woman who had cancer, there were sort of circumstances beyond a district's control, and then we got into this fuzzier gray area where we're not sure if by, we took action, no one sued us, we're okay, but we sort of defined substantial compliance as what we thought it was, but it wasn't necessarily something that the statute might have allowed. So I think the idea of sending it to a committee to review is good, but I almost think that it would be helpful to have a legislative fix of some kind, very narrow, but something that clarifies that the board has the ability to do that under circumstances that could be defined, A, B, and C types of circumstances. So like with the State Board of Education, it does not get into this board's work. It does not have the powers to do that, but there are certain areas where you could have that consideration so that we're not caught sideways with legal counsel telling us this isn't what we'd like to see done because the statutes say X, Y, and Z, and yet we're doing it because we think there's been substantial compliance. Do we leave ourselves open to potential lawsuits in the future, plus the angst and the work that the districts have to go through to figure out whether that appeal is going to go or not, and leaving things up in the air so much. So I would second or support this going to committee, but ask the committee to look at whether very narrowly crafted procedures such as the State Board of Education has might work for those unusual circumstances that we've encountered.
Well, I think that's a great idea. I certainly think those approaches are compatible. They're not mutually exclusive. And I want to just say for the record that my concern goes beyond lawsuits on this issue. My concern goes to the Attorney General bond validations. And if we get into a situation where, and I'm not saying it has happened, but at some point in the future, if this board were to take an action that it thought there was substantial compliance and somebody raised the issue and the AG felt that there wasn't and that we acted outside of the law, it could, in fact, imperil future opinions on bonds, which means we couldn't sell bonds with state bonds with the program. That's my biggest concern. I'm far less concerned about litigation than I am about future bond validations. Hasn't been a problem yet. I'm not saying it will be in the future, but if I was to wake up in the middle of the night concerned about something, that would be my concern, because that would affect potentially hundreds of school districts and a whole lot of construction projects. Mr. Duffy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members. Tom Duffy again for cash. I like the idea of this discussion going to your subcommittee. We have an alternative for consideration that we have proposed in a letter that we've sent to Mr. Sheehy and the rest of you, and I'd like to outline it. But first, I think it may be helpful to give an alternative viewpoint. The 1% that you've talked about certainly is an important statistic, but if we look back over the period of the last couple of years, the hours and hours and hours of hearings that you've had on projects that have been appealed to you, some of which that have gone from meeting to meeting and have had a great deal of contentiousness, have included places like Davis and Valverde, 2 from San Bernardino. You are in litigation, as I understand it, with a district because the district was told that they couldn't appeal to the issue to the board. I know the LA item that you heard some months ago on the 150% rule was actually the other board before the board changed. The 150% rule and the 60% rule was something that, as I'm understanding it, LA was told they couldn't actually appeal the issue. In a conversation with us, we said, we believe everything is appealable to the board. You did hear that, and there was a lengthy appeal. What is our suggestion to assist you in the number of hours and meetings that you spend on the types of issues we're talking about is a place where you have a second level of review. Ms. Fuller and I were superintendents at the same time. We dealt with grievances. A teacher would grieve a contract issue to a principal. The principal would deny the grievance, and the teacher would take it to the superintendent. That's that second level. If the superintendent denied that grievance, it would go to the Board of Education. And so the Board of Education would have final, like you, a board that, multiple people that considers the issues and makes a final determination. There's a similar process for dealing with students that may be suspended from school, if that's appealed, or expulsions, which are more serious. But there is a process that involves several steps. So our suggestion is this. You are, as we believe it, looking for a new AEO. The AEO is independent of the Office of Public School Construction. The AEO serves the board. The AEO could, and this sounds like a good deal of work depending upon the amount of time, but if it's 1% and it's done in a particular way, maybe it limits the amount of time, and that's the idea. The AEO would be that second level of appeal to say, let's review this, and the AEO then, the process could take different shapes, but in essence gives you the view of the AEO of this, or the AEO makes the determination themselves. I'm thinking the board would probably want to make sure that they heard the whole thing through. But the idea here is to give you a second set of eyes and ears. In reading the staff report, it certainly identifies that the concept of a mercy clause suggests the board may allocate state bond funds on the basis of circumstances rather than law. I would say it would be on interpretation of law and regulation, and you have one interpretation. You may, and with Lammersville, you came to a different interpretation of that issue, and that took a while to adjudicate, but you got to an end that it sounded like the board wanted to get to. So not to belabor this, it's in a letter, and the suggestion is create it, and maybe create it with a sunset as to having a review, so that you see if you do cut down on the amount of time that comes before you. And we offer this not in criticism. We offer this as a suggestion, as a friend of the board, to help you with the hours and hours that you spend, because you're busy people with other jobs.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Hold on, Scotty. I want to push back a little bit. I've now done about 9 meetings with this board, maybe 10 or 11 if you count some of the short closed session meetings we had. And so I don't have as long of a history as Mr. Duffy or some of the other members on this dais, but I would offer a different opinion about how long this board takes to do certain things. I'm very pleased that Senator Lowenthal made a motion 3 meetings ago to create 2 subcommittees, one of which to look at OPSC's audit authority and what it's doing as far as audits, and perhaps adopt additional guidelines consistent with the law. But I was also extremely pleased when Senator Lowenthal made a motion for a subcommittee that would establish rules and procedures for this body. If this body operated like any other legislative committee that the legislative members on this board sat on, we cut our time in half easily. We spent hour after hour after hour after hour hearing the same item over and over and over. Why? Because we couldn't get to a majority vote, and this board has 10 members on it. So what happens is everybody in the advocate community goes running around lobbying, trying to get their way on it, and it comes back to the board, and we go through this process. Now, in any legislative committee, if a member brings a bill and they can't get enough votes to get the bill passed, what happens? The bill fails, and it gets reconsideration. They can come back a second time, or the bill can get made into a 2-year bill. They can come back a following time. If we had a rule or procedure where something could only come before the board for a couple of votes, then it would be disposed of one way or another. So I don't think we go on and on and on because the staff hasn't done a good job in working on the issues. I think sometimes it's because we're an even-membered board and we don't have any way of closing these items out because we haven't adopted any operating rules. So I don't disagree. I think your approach has a lot of merit, Tom. I'm certainly willing to consider it more along with the colleagues on the board to get their views on it. But I've seen from my own experience, limited though it is, that we spend a lot of time having issues come back. Like that L.A. issue that you mentioned on the L.A. appeal, that had come before the board 4 times. And spent just a huge amount of time. One of the meetings I went to, that went on for over an hour and a half on that one item. I'm sorry, other comments on the board, Ms. Brownlee?
How could you tell? I just had that look, I guess. Well, I mean, I hear what you're saying. I think I disagree a little bit. I think, the difference between a bill and what we do here is we're dealing with taxpayer money, and with a bill, we're not really dealing with that. So, I mean, it seems in some sense, and I'm very happy with the idea of taking this on and discussing it in committee and coming back to us, but in some sense, I think what we're doing and acting, I think when I took on this job, and I haven't been doing it very long either, I understood that part of the role and responsibility was to serve as an appeals board. I think the very small percentage of people that come in the data that we have here, and I think sometimes when it's an appeal and it doesn't fit into a right hole and right square, it's difficult, and you have to spend time really sort of wrestling with it. I think some of the problem is the reason we have to discuss it over and over again is our ability to attend at the time that we need to attend the meetings. Obviously, right now we're struggling because we have missing members and we can't deal with a particular item. So I think that sort of plays into some of the longer deliberations, if you will, but I just think when you're struggling with something like this and really having to wrestle with the exception to the not the exception to the rule, but the exception that doesn't really kind of fit into the rules and regulations, and therefore that's why we're having the appeal in some sense, is sort of an appropriate procedure. Do I want to stay here longer than we need to? Absolutely not. But I do think when you get to that, everything goes, all these other cases move along in the structure of which we have set out to do, and we have this very small percentage, but the small percentage requires focus and attention and time and differences of opinions and issues that does require debate and to wrestle with and finally come to the right conclusion.
I don't disagree with anything that you just said. My only issue is after having gone through all of that, it'd be nice to be able to get to a conclusion, not have a split vote, and then have to re-agendize it, and then we put it over because somebody's not here, and then So that's why I really look forward to the work of the Rules and Procedures Committee. I think you're right. This isn't my analogy to the bill process. I think was fair on process, but not on substance. I agree with you, Ms. Brown. Mr. Harvey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Both of you said two things which I subscribe to, and that is it's a privilege to serve on this body, but it is a task that we must do collectively, and I think we should find a mechanism, whether it's this rules and procedures, maybe helps things come to us more expeditiously, but I think it should be decided here and not some step in between. I think it's proper to send it to the Rules and Procedures Committee. I think wrestling with the definition of substantial compliance may give us some guidance. I'm not afraid of a legislative solution either, but I support what you're doing.
So if the motion would be that we refer this to the Rules and Procedures Committee to consider whether we should have a narrowly crafted piece of legislation for a waiver process, or whether the definition as it stands of substantial compliance is adequate.
All things should be on the table. I think that would be the proper motion.
Mr. Chair? Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Senator Torlakson.
Just to add that the point you raised, Mr. Chairman, I think could possibly also be addressed in terms of the bond covenants, in terms of future bonds, and if the future bonds anticipate that there is a narrowly crafted place where mercy situations or unusual circumstances, not the fault of the district, not an intentional attack on the integrity of the process or trying to get money that you don't deserve, that could then be reflected in future bond covenants in a way that it wouldn't be an issue there either.
Mr. Chair, if I can just weigh in real quickly, the question of the board's authority had come up previously, and I did have an opportunity to take a look at that briefly. The concern, I kind of dovetail both Assemblymember Torlakson and your concerns that you raised, in that the finding I made is there is quite a line of case law out there that say administrative agencies, which the State Allocation Board is considered, legally have limited powers. Their powers are limited to those which are conferred on them expressly or by implication by Constitution or statute. Now, that is
somewhat of a flexible definition as to what impliedly has been placed on you. The concern I would want to make sure the board is aware of is if you're found to have exceeded those powers, then those actions that you took were void.
All right.
So that may be something that lends toward a legislative fix to have some certainty in that aspect.
Okay, Henry, thank you for clarification. Kathleen. For the benefit of the audience, after we finish with this item, we're losing. We have to. I just want to let the board members know we have to go into closed session with 6 members today because we have an appointment we have to make. Because if we don't, a lot of people are going to be very disappointed. So we have to do that. And I understand, time is marching on. So I know we don't have everybody here that wants to be here, but we're going to have to go into closed session before we lose this quorum. I'm sorry, Ms. Moore?
Just a final comment on this, if I may. Assemblymember Hancock, I know this is your issue. I do think 2 things. I think appropriately so, Rob, you talk about the 15 and 4-day letters, I think was put into place by the former administration. It was a good process to have things move along. But I would say that within that process, very often on those 4-day letters, districts make decisions and they say, the Office of Public School Construction says I'm going to get $1 million. I believe I need $1 million. I believe I deserve $1.2 million. Is it worth the $200,000 to appeal the project? Districts make those kinds of decisions all the time. And on the whole, I think they make the decision, I got to move my project forward. I'll agree to what has been determined for it. So there is that universe that goes on. I was astounded by the rate. It's very low. But there are times that districts are making decisions not to move an appeal forward, to just get the funds that they can, even if they might have a difference, and move their project out into construction. And that's part of the system. But I do believe that if we're going to look at our board procedures around it, that we do have a clear appeal process to school districts. And that the merit of what Mr. Duffy brought forward around that I would like to see, with your permission, I know it's your issue, the subcommittee look at it as well.
Oh, fine. No, that's fine.
The board can give the subcommittee's direction, I think, at any time. Now, so I'm sorry, Senator Hancock, could you just repeat your motion? Because I apologize, I didn't get it.
The motion is to send this agenda item to the Committee on Rules and Procedures to ask them if they have any recommendations for the board to tighten up our procedures so that the process is clarified.
On appeals?
On appeals.
And to look at substantial compliance.
And to look at, definitions of substantial compliance, or if they believe that legislation to create a formal waiver process is necessary, to let us know that.
With your permission, I'd like to tack one more thing on there, which I think will be non-controversial. Can we tack on to your motion a requirement for staff to provide us an update on these statistics quarterly, so that if we start to see that the number of appeals are going up, that might be an early warning sign for us that there's a problem.
Right.
Some sort of quarterly report so we can see how things are going.
And also Mr. Duffy's proposal. I think we just want to look at, we know that we have a little roadblock here. We just want to figure out the most expeditious way to move it forward.
Okay, so we have a motion, a second on the floor, and for Mr. Duffy's benefit, I don't know if he's still here, your suggestion will be taken up for review by the subcommittee. Thank you. Okay, seeing no objection to this, all in favor? Aye. Okay. Okay, members, we've taken care of everything now except for OSE, seismic. I'm sorry, did we want to put, Ms. Hancock, did you want to put seismic over?
I did want to put seismic over for a month so that we could have both the shaking regulation presented to us and the review of construction types, which was the other thing that we decided we could do by regulation. Because if we increase the number of construction types, as well as the the work that we did on shaking, we could do one set of regulation changes and move on.
Is there any?
Especially because of the lateness of the hour.
Yes.
I would hope maybe we could just do that.
Yeah, except if we're putting seismic over, we're putting it over. So is there any objection to members of the board putting the seismic item over? We'll be happy to take public comment. I'm sorry.
I'm just wondering on that point, if people had come to testify, and I don't know that there are that many, but maybe we could see it's not like a dozen, there may only be one school district here that had something that would be relevant to us. Maybe they don't need to come back again if they get their point across today.
Senator Torlakson, I agree with you. I'm very sensitive to that. And I also know we've got people in the audience that have been here to now 3 or 4 meetings, and I'm afraid that we're not going to get to them tonight either. We can take the seismic testimony later in this hearing if this gentleman or others want to talk about it. But we've got people that flew up here from Southern California that made 3 trips up here.
Sure.
So why don't, if it's okay with you, sir, we'll take everything on the record, but we're not going to take that item up right now. Is that okay? Okay. Very good. Great. So we'll take anybody that wants to testify on the seismic item. We'll take that, but we're not going to take it up for action. So we're left now with Murrieta, Osei, and did we do item number 4, Rob? Financial needs of the state relocatable classrooms?
Yes, there was no action required.
Okay, and we need to go into closed session. I'd like to, yes, Ms. Garrity. Okay. Okay, very good. So we're going to, in deference to Senator Lowenthal, we'll take that public testimony on seismic now. Now we're going to go into closed session for purposes of a personnel action, and then we've got to hold on to 6 members and take up Murrieta and Osei, because we've had these on this agenda so many times. Mr. Botello from the Office of Statewide Audits and Valuations has made several trips here. He's here again tonight, and I think it would only be fair to take that item up so we can dispense with it. So, sir, if you'd like to come forward with your testimony on seismic, please.
Thank you. I really do appreciate this, Mr. Sheehy, members of the board. I'm Mark Winger, Superintendent of the Newhall School District, and I will not be able to be up in July, so I really do appreciate this. In 1999, my school district passed a GO bond, and in January of 2003, I received a letter personally addressed to me from the Division of State Architects regarding AB 300 and directing districts to take a look at the list to make sure if we had certain types of buildings on that list pursuant to AB 300. Following that letter's direction, I asked our architect to check the list, and we did find 2 of our buildings on it. That letter also specified that we needed to have an engineering report done on those buildings in order to see if they were vulnerable. We had 2 buildings that were within the zone defined and within the criteria defined as they were originally. One was a 1940 era's poured-in-place concrete. One was a tilt-up 1960 era building. Given that study, I felt a moral obligation to go ahead and do the retrofitting that was necessary for the safety of my students, my staff, and the public that use those buildings. The Citizens Committee that I worked with agreed, and we made about a $2 million left turn in our building project in order to do this retrofitting. We did the right thing. We reacted to a letter sent to us by the Division of State Architects, and now we don't have access to that seismic funding because of the regulations that are in place today. And since you're going to be looking at regulations again next month, I'm asking you for consideration of a date change for the effective date in the regulations. I would say the AB 300 list was the trigger that started this process in my school district. A date that would work to change the eligibility for access to the funds would be the date of the letter, January 2003, or in my case, the date of my notice of completion on my first building, April of 2005. That would allow for districts who responded to the DSA letter, hired the engineer, did the study, completed the work, and meet the criteria of the most vulnerable buildings. We have a council opinion that does say that the SAB has the authority to set the date, and that there's no date referenced in the initiative nor in statute, and pursuant to code, you have the right to set the date for rules and regulations. Therefore, I don't believe this request really asks for retroactive consideration because the proposition is silent on the date. There was a concern in previous discussion about the universe if the date was allowed. And I have to tell you, I feel like Pluto, out there all alone, not even a planet anymore, because we did take a look. It's been over a year. No one's claimed the $199 million. I have a project that I believe fits the criteria. And as we asked the DSA for a list of possible districts, and we got a list of possible districts, we did check with all those districts, and we don't believe that anyone else fits the criteria of having done the work because of the DSA letter, yet got it done before the May 2006 date that's currently in regulation. So I'm asking for consideration of that date, checking it again, and deference for a school district that did the right thing in the end. And I really appreciate you taking my comment tonight.
Well, Mr. Winger, listen, I'm really glad that you made the trip up here today, and I want you to know that it's really great to hear what you did. I mean, you really did do the right thing. There are a lot of school districts that could follow your example. And here's what I think would be helpful for this body before any action's taken on an amended regulation, because I think that we should take a really good look at this, because I think that we want to send the right signals out to school districts to be proactive and to take action to make students safer. So what I'd like you to do, I understand that you've done some research to see if there are any other projects out there that may qualify, because of course if we make this exception for you, there could be others, and I think this body needs to know what the fiscal impact of that decision would be before they would go along with that. Is that true that you've done some research on that,
Yeah.
Mr. Winger?
We've checked with probably 8 different school districts that were recommended by the DSA.
Okay, so if you could work with Mr. Thorman on this, I'm assuming he'll be cooperative. And the main thing I want for finance to do, is I want to make sure that the information that you've looked at and developed, that you run through the Department of Finance, because I understand from some of the research you've done, it doesn't appear that there are any significant number, or maybe not any other projects out there that are going to come forward. If that's the case, then the only fiscal impact we have is your situation. So I think it would be helpful for this body if you could coordinate with the state architect and finance and OPSC so that you could come back at the next hearing if possible. If not, we could take it up at the following hearing. But you'd have my commitment to bring this issue back to this body with that analysis and with finance's sign off that they've looked at it and reviewed it, and then bring it before this body for an up or down vote. And I think then, if that's a regulation that this body could amend and address your situation. But I think we'd have to know how many school districts you're dealing with and what the fiscal impact is. That's just my view. I don't know what the other members
Fine.
feel.
Why don't we include some of that in the, we're putting this over. We're going to get both regulations shaking on construction types, and in addition that we're going to look at the Newhall situation, or the start date for retroactivity, because I agree. I think it's very impressive that you stepped up and did the right thing at the time.
Finance?
Yes,
Sorry,
since there is a desire to look at other building types, I think that we need to expand upon the data that we're looking at and see how many of those buildings, if we expand the building types, would also be eligible for this funding. If we want to look at a complete picture of what the potential is in terms of funding projects that have already been completed.
Okay. Kathleen.
Can I just be clear, what is finance staff doing that OPSC staff wouldn't normally be doing? What kind of, just so I understand.
The reason, Ms. Morrow, I asked for finance is because I want a fiscal estimate. I think if we have somebody come before the board and say, you adopted this program, we took an action before you adopted the program, we'd like to be grandfathered in, I think out of fairness, we would have to be willing to grandfather in anybody else that's done that. Finance is the entity that I normally rely upon for fiscal estimates, and I'd like them to take a look at it. If you're uncomfortable with that, we can certainly discuss it, but I'd like them to work with us.
I don't want to belabor it, but I do think the staff is the Office of Public School Construction, and they could work in concert with finance.
Okay.
but I don't believe that finance has a direct line responsibility to the board.
I agree with you, they don't.
And so
That is what we're doing, working together. We're not doing something separate from them. We're working in tandem.
Are you comfortable with that?
I am.
Okay. Yes, Ms. Brownlee.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think the data that we're going to try to collect is the appropriate thing to do. I just wanted to also comment that I think that there are a lot of districts, and again, I don't have all of the data to back up what I'm saying, but I'm certainly anecdotally aware of some who have done lots of earthquake seismic upgrades out of their bond funds and through modernization and new construction, and did not qualify or did not go after the earthquake or seismic funding that was the set-aside here. So I think there are districts out there during their normal course of work in terms of modernization, particularly, I guess, would be more modernization than new construction, that are doing seismic upgrades. So now they might not be on the AB 300 list, which this is a case where a school district was notified by government to say that they had buildings that were seismically unsafe. So, but I do want to say that I think that there are districts out there that are morally doing the right thing in terms of upgrading their facilities with existing funding that's not coming out of the set aside for seismic retrofit.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Savage.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Bill Savage, West Contra Costa Unified School District. And I want to concur with Assemblymember Brownlee. Our district has 17 school sites on the AB 300 list. We have 6 sites that meet the 1.7G ground shaking on the Hayward Fault. Of those 6, we've voluntarily retrofitted, torn down, and rebuilt several. 4 of the schools. And so I think you're absolutely correct. School districts have been making this investment in modernization and seismic retrofitting and upgrade for many, many years using local funds. It's very clear. But what I really wanted to focus on is supporting Senator Hancock to put this item over and to focus OPSC and DSA on expanding the building types and considering, again, the issue that if we have a structural engineer's report that indicates that there's a probability of collapse, what does it matter what type of building it is? If it's going to collapse, that's a serious safety risk for our students. And so I think we need to work with DSA to really revise and give them more flexibility. I want to raise one more issue that is not addressed in the legislation, and that we have submitted our first seismic program application to the state for Portola Middle School in El Cerrito. And this school is subject to earthquake-induced landslide hazard, and it has already received a concurrence letter from DSA and a concurrence letter from the California Geological Survey that the site is unsafe to occupy. It's not a classic project in terms of the program as it exists now, and yet this is a safety risk of the magnitude that the district is abandoning the site and moving to a new school site and building a new building to replace it. And so I would urge you to consider giving DSA the flexibility to consider a variety of types, because geotechnical issues are really huge in the earthquake area. You're talking about liquefaction, you're talking about earthquake-induced landsliding, you're talking about lateral spreading and fault rupture that creates serious student safety risks, and they're not really addressed in the way that the program is structured at this time. So we really do appreciate OPSC and DSA starting the process and getting as far as they've gotten, but I think there's a lot more work to do, and I appreciate holding this over and looking at this further. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Savage. Welcome, Senator Lowenthal. How are you doing? I almost feel like we need to come give you a group hug after all that.
Pain.
Such difficult times, but I'm a little tired.
Okay, fair enough, Senator. I just want you to know, I know from past experience and from my colleagues how difficult this process is, how difficult this process must be that you're going through. And thank you for serving on that committee. I know that must be incredibly difficult. We have Mr. Harvey, and then it looks like Mr. Tao would like to address us. Yes, Scott.
The one thing that continues to haunt me is that we have such need in this area and we have such a small pot to draw from. And the guidance that we have had to follow up to this point is the worst of the worst. And I think we're going to have to continue to fall back on that. I'm not saying we don't need to expand building types, we don't need to expand the shake zone, but we have a limited amount of dollars. And that physically is something that needs to be part of our discussion and our decision. I know it will be. But I feel the angst on this. I think the AB 300 report cited billions of dollars of risk, and we only have 199 million. So we have to start somewhere and work our way down and make a case for a more robust set-aside in a future bond.
Okay, now, Mr. Tao, we're going to let you talk, and Mr. Duffy and anybody else, but since we have waited some time, and I'm sure we're all tired, I know Mr. Lowenthal is exhausted, and we really have several items, we're going to defer further testimony on this item, and then later in the hearing, I'll stay here. You have my commitment to stay here till the cows come home, if necessary. We'll take all the testimony on this item for the record. But is that okay, Mr. Tao? You okay with that?
Very well.
I want to make sure you get a chance. Is that okay, Tom? Because we really do need to. Okay, we're going to go into closed session now for purposes of personnel action. And then when we reconvene, yes. No, we're going to do Murrieta. Yeah, this won't take long at all. Then we're going to do Murrieta. My estimate on how long we're in closed session is 10 minutes or less. So as soon as you close the room, then we're going to come back and do Murrieta and do OSE. Is that okay, Senator Lowenthal? And then we left the roll open on the other items if you want to add on to anything. Closed session for purposes of a personnel action, and the board has unanimously appointed Ms. Susan Ronbach to be our interim assistant executive officer. I think we are extremely fortunate to have Ms. Ronbach. She's got a long, distinguished career in public service. She has executive level experience in the executive branch of government. She's got a long resume also in the legislative branch of government. Having spent many years working for Steve Peace, she's assured me she can take any of the drama or difficulties that happen on this board. And she's got good program experience with the Department of Education, the Office of the Secretary, and as I said, in the legislature, and other experience as well. So I'm delighted to welcome Ms. Ronbach aboard. Thank you so much, Susan. Okay, so Senator Lowenthal, just so you know, if there's any of the items that we've already taken up that you'd like to add on to, we did leave the roll open on everything, including the consent calendar. What the open items that we have left are Murrieta Valley and OSE. And if there's no objection, why don't we go to Murrieta Valley? Seismic's coming back. It hasn't. Seismic's there. I said I'd stay till the cows come home, Tom, and I meant it.
Did Seismic get referred, or we put it off till next month?
It got put over, but there was some more public testimony, that, and I promised that they could make it, but we needed to take care of the action items first. So is Murrieta here? Yes, please come forward. And Rob, we know what this issue is. Have there been any developments? And I think we should hear from Murrieta and then see if we can't get some action on this item.
Good evening. Bill Lean, Assistant Superintendent. I just say for the record that the district concurs with the recommendations in the report, and we have no concerns. We're open for questions.
Okay, we've had this item before us a couple of times. Are there? I'm sure there must be some questions and comments from the board. Or
nope, I moved the recommendation.
We have a motion and a second. Are there additional comments or questions from board members? Anybody from the public on this item? Seeing none, is there any opposition to this item? Senator Lowenthal.
No, I concur with the recommendations. I think those are fair recommendations. I just want to clarify. I think what we're also saying is that that the argument, I don't accept the argument. I don't think we accept it. That by returning the funds, that means that there is therefore no material inaccuracy. I don't think that's an argument just because you return the funds. Although I think in this project, there isn't any material inaccuracy. It wasn't because they just returned the funds. There isn't material inaccuracy since the certification was based upon an estimate. And going forward, I just think we need a clearer policy on that issue for circumstances where the cost estimate is significantly different than the actual cost. So I agree in this case, it's fine, but I don't want to say that we're assuming that just any time a district returns the funds, there is no material inaccuracy. And I think we need the implementation committee to look at that whole 60% commensurate issue and recommend practices back to us, and that's really what I would suggest.
I don't know who, I think the maker of the motion was Ms. Hancock. Would it be okay, Ms. Hancock, to amend your motion with the referral to implementation committee that Senator Lowenthal requested?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And that's what I would like to recommend.
So with that, then, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That item is approved. Thank you for coming up today, sir. Okay, so let's now take up the Department of Finance Office of State Audits and Evaluations. Mr. Botello, this is tab number 14. Is it tab number 15? I apologize.
Yes.
15?
David Botello with the Department of Finance, Office of State Audits and Evaluations. We previously reported on our report back in February, and we were asked to attend again tonight. I'm not certain of what the questions are or what you would like us to discuss tonight.
David, for my benefit, since it's been quite some time, could you refresh my memory, and I think the board's memory, on how you got engaged with OSA in the first place, and what was the nature of that engagement?
I'll have Mary Kelly, one of our audit managers, join me. She was there at the beginning of the assignment. Sorry, step aside.
Mary Kelly, Department of Finance, Office of State Audits and Evaluations. We entered an interagency agreement with Department of General Services to assist OPSC in some training of their audit staff and in developing audit tools for use on the bond funds audits.
Okay, well, I mean, give me a little bit about so OPSC contracts with you to come in to work with them to do some training. Is that right?
Right.
So the final report that got distributed ended up dealing with more than just reporting on the training. Is that right?
Right.
So how did that happen?
Okay. When we were out there performing the background research that we needed to do to enable them to talk to us about doing risk assessments, we have to get an understanding of the program, the control environment in which these funds are distributed. We attended meetings, read information, attended board hearings, attended implementation committee meetings, met with members of OPSC on several occasions, and became aware of what we call in the auditing environment, or in the auditing profession, problems with the control environment. And what our concern was that OPSC was dedicating a significant amount of resources and staff time to develop this audit plan and these tools and techniques, where we were concerned that the environment in which they were operating could potentially preclude any of these measures that they were taking from being effective. Additionally, they're required to comply with the governor's executive order to have a bond accountability plan, and the concern was that some of these items that they have as part of their accountability and transparency were not going to be able to be effective.
Okay. Questions or comments from the board members?
Yeah.
Senator Lowenthal.
Well, the good and the bad. The good part, I think, just an observation is, out of this, I think, have come two subcommittees or committees to really look at how we do business, and I applaud you. I think some of these issues and really led to, but some of the conclusions and and especially I thought, in just my perspective, and we talked about this the last time, I thought we're highly critical of the State Allocation Board and its relationship to OPSC, and then I strongly disagree with those conclusions and many of the statements in the report. So while I think some very good has come out of it, I personally reject the report itself and the overall the tenor of the report, and would like this board not to accept this report.
Okay, Senator. Other comments from board members? I want to just say that my initial intention with this report was, once it was done, was to have it distributed to all the board members and not take it up formally here for approval or rejection or whatever. I thought it was a report. I thought it would have some useful information, and for some members, maybe different useful information for other members. Just speaking on my behalf, not as a finance employee now, but as the chair of this board, I didn't feel compelled that we needed to take action on this report one way or another. So my preference would be to let this report just be what it is. I would be concerned. I understand that not everybody agrees with all of the conclusions in here, but there is a lot of information in here that is useful, and I'd be concerned if we were to take an adverse action on this report, what signal we might be sending vis-a-vis our stewardship of bond funds and what that might mean going forward. So I don't know how everybody feels about this, but I would request that this report is a finance report. It's not on the OPSC website. You don't have to refer to it. But I think the appropriate action here would just let this report stand. We don't have to accept it. I think it would be a mistake to formally take a vote and reject it. No. Oh.
Did a motion not to accept the report or to reject the report is what I think. That there are. I've already stated my reasons. I don't have to go through.
Okay, so Senator Lowenthal, you do.
I do want to make a motion. I do not want. I think there are some things that are.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor. I want to make a few more comments then for the record. This is a report that dealt with the assessment and control of construction project costs and did an evaluation of that. It is also a report dealing with capital budgets and how they're reviewed, grant agreements and construction contracts signed between state programs and local project management, project payments, progress reports, program authority, approved change orders, project expenditures, variance analysis, and so on and so forth. This is a report that looked at how they were doing that, how that compared with other things, and it also made some recommendations on how this program could run more effectively. I think it is a mistake for this body to reject this report because I think it's sending the wrong message to the taxpayers in this state whose support we're going to need to pass future bonds. So I understand how my colleague feels, but I want to say for the record that I disagree with this body doing that. I'd also like to put into the record, since the superintendent of public instruction had written a letter back to OSA, and that letter was put into the record, I think it would be appropriate to put the response letter back into the record at this time, and also to point out that quite a few of the comments that were made in the OSA report were also comments that were made in a report August 2007 by the Little Hoover Commission. I'd like to also put that report back into this record at that time. So I don't know the appropriate way for doing that, but I'd like to do that.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Senator Torkelson.
I'm going to look at those documents. I haven't had the chance to review those, but if we want to put them in the record, we should put them in the record. What I was going back to what Senator Lowenthal said, and here's what I thought I heard, that there were a portion of the report that he disagreed with, and I agree with him that I disagree with it too, in terms of its comments about the board's discretion to make judgmental assessments of the rules and regulations and come up with our opinions. And there was an element of the report that dealt with that seemed critical of that, and also with critical of the possible role of the superintendent's representative, who gets to see the projects a little bit earlier, most of the projects earlier, and then gets to see them again here. And that part of the report I don't accept as being accurate or valid, and we just have a difference of opinion. The other parts of the report that you referred to in terms of efficiency or accountability or compliance with the mandates to implement these bond funds in a responsible manner. I think that those comments are valid, and I think I had heard that you were wishing to have the subcommittee take a look at how to implement them, or maybe it's already in front of the subcommittee, how to implement those parts of the recommendations, but the part pertaining to the board and our role, I think, is the part that I heard you're not accepting, and I could support a motion that's not accepting of that part of the report as what our opinion as a board, that we assert our ability to have such a discretionary judgment and debate over those kinds of issues. And I would second a motion like that. It seems like it's close to what you were getting at.
Yeah, if I might respond, I mean, there were just things that I found quite offensive. The lack of objectivity, they said, about the board, that the majority of the SAB board members are elected officials, resulting in an inherent conflict, and we are subject to inappropriate influences on occasion, have permitted politics to trump policy, that the superintendent of public instructions, as was pointed out, delegate may not possess the requisite objectivity in the consideration of projects funded, the fact that when they talked about significant potential impediment to effectual controls is the ability of the SAB to override and negate fiscal and managerial controls established by OPSC. Well, that's our role, is to be oversight. We are a board. And so there's a thrust in this, while there are some very good points in it that we should be looking at, there is a thrust in the report that I find highly objectionable, especially the role of the SAB and the elected officials on it, and also the role of the superintendent of public instructions delegate. And for that reason, I cannot accept this. And
I'd like to hear a response from OSAI on those points that the senator just raised.
I think one of the points to make on the senator's comments, some of the comments were echoed by the Little Hoover Commission's report a couple of years ago.
So you support those comments?
We do, yes.
That's why I object to it.
But consistent with the discussion that was held earlier before Senator Lowenthal entered, there was a discussion by the board regarding establishing some criteria and some policies and procedures. That's what the report alludes to. We're making recommendations for improvements to the board to provide better accountability, better oversight, more transparency. Ultimately, when any audit organization comes in and makes recommendations, it's ultimately up to management whether they accept and implement those recommendations and changes for the better of the organization, or choose not to implement those changes.
My concern is, in rejecting this report formally, we're sending a message that we don't want to implement those changes, and I'm very concerned that that sends the wrong message to a whole lot of people we don't want to send it to.
I would add that
particularly when we're in an environment where it's going to be tough to get bonds approved and to get bonds allocated, I don't want to be sending a message that we're not interested in taking a hard look at how we do business to make sure we're doing it the best way we can.
Just a comment to that, Tom. The report that's before us is 5 pages, and it does not address, in my mind, the issues that you've talked about. I think what was the original agreement was to have OSA come in, audit what the OPSC was doing, and make those recommendations. Those recommendations are not in this report. What is in this report is the lack of objectivity of the State Allocation Board. So I don't see it as in the same manner as that. I think probably what you did with the staff and carrying out that portion of it and working with them to have a greater internal process was probably good. We don't see what that was. That's not in the report. What we do see is the accusations of the lack of objectivity of the State Allocation Board, and as we heard today, in the 0.8 cases % of the cases that come before this board on an appeal, which is our statutory and regulatory responsibility to hear those and to render judgment. The staff can't do that. We have to do that. That's our responsibility. That's why we're here as a board. And of course, the conflict of interest issue on the SBI's delegate, of course, we've already talked about, and the superintendent of public instruction does have a letter to that effect, asking the board that this is not appropriate to accept those items.
David, do you want to respond to Ms. Moore's comments?
I think the term accusations is a fairly strong term, and I don't think we've made any accusations in the report. We've pointed out areas where there are potential concerns, whether those conflicts actually come to fruition and cause harm to the board or to the school districts, yet to be seen. We're not saying that it has happened. We're saying the potential exists that it could happen. That's all.
Mr. Harvey?
I hearken back to the comment that you made about making recommendations and then pointing out what could be overrides to those control recommendations. And to me, you've just summarized the advantage of hearing that there might be. And I think the words are may. It's not shall or there is. And it's a reminder that you in this era of transparency, you need to be aware of potential conflicts, potential overrides of control. To me, you've done what any audit function is. You've made some recommendations and you say, but there may be things that might make that more difficult. I agree with the chair, and that is that the things that are in here need to go forward, and we shouldn't be hung up on terms that state potential and not fact. I'm comfortable with having this report simply advise the board.
Well, I want to just also respond, Kathleen, all due respect, you said that these things weren't in the report. The report that I have is actually closer to 10 pages long, and on page 4, they talk about some of the fiscal and managerial controls that were weaker at OPSC than other comparable institutions. They talk specifically about the assessment of construction costs, grantees submitting capital budgets, grant agreements, grant disbursements, and so on and so forth. I mean, they specifically talked about areas where OPSC was weak and where they could be stronger in administering the bond funds. And so I guess I just have a different view than you do, but I'm basing my comments from what's right in the report on page 4. I mean, you're right, they didn't write a 30-page how to fix it thesis because that wasn't their engagement. But I think they identified weaknesses and that those are in fact here in the report. And I think that those are areas that we should all be concerned about as we administer taxpayer funds in this program.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I also would focus in on that page 4. There's the section called Assignment of Responsibility and Authority. Suggested motion here that I think meets Senator Lowenthal's concern, but also the concern you mentioned, that we take action to refer to the subcommittee the portions of this report that deal with the issues of assignment of responsibility and authority, and it's outlined there again on the top 2/3 of page 4. But we not accept the report to the degrees that the sections that deal with override of controls and objectivity, because of the fundamental difference we have in maybe view of how the board operates as an appeal board, as a board with some discretion. Some of the issues, by the way, that deal with the override of controls and that deal with the issues of objectivity, we've just referred previously in our earlier action today to the committee to look at the guidelines, the rules, the statutory foundation of our ability to make discretionary calls. And so we've sort of addressed that part of the report separately by referring it to staff. What I think Senator Lowenthal is expressing, I share that concern, is sort of the strong way that this was worded. So I would make a motion to not accept the report as it relates to the override of controls and the activity or the role of the board, the role of the superintendent of public instruction's representative, but to refer the portions of the report that deal with the responsibility and authority and efficiencies to the committee to further review implementing.
Well, it sounds to me, Senator Torkelson, that it sounds to me like that's an earnest attempt to find compromise. And you know, that sounds like a compromise Senator Lowenthal is willing to support. And in the spirit of working with my colleagues, I'm willing to accept that. So if that's a motion, do we have a second? Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there anybody that's going to object or lay off? Okay, let's have a roll call vote.
Okay, Senator Lowenthal? Senator Hancock?
Aye.
Assemblymember Fuller? Assemblymember Brownlee? Assemblymember Torlakson? Scott Harvey? Kathleen Moore?
Aye.
Tom Sheehy?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay. Was there additional public comment on this item, Mr. Duffy?
I have a little public comment.
Oh, Ms.
If I
Hancock.
could. I think parts of this, as I read it, honestly, seem to be the perennial tension between appointed administrators and elected people. A little bit run amok, if you don't mind me saying so. I have many friends in administration and many